Hello, everybody, and welcome to what I believe will begin a new discourse on science versus atheism. I'm going to be your narrator, and as indicated in the title of this video, this discourse will focus on making some clarifications on the relationships between theism, atheism, and science. There are a large number of myths about science supporting atheism while being at odds with theism. That notion is going to be challenged by the following. If you think you've got it somewhat figured out when it comes to theology, anti-theism, and scientific progress, I'm both hoping and betting that this will throw a wrench into what you think you understand. I'll begin with an introduction to myself, my father, and the events which led my father to pen this controversial discourse. I'm 37 years old and I work as a quality assurance auditor in a science laboratory. My job is to observe various phases of a wide variety of scientific tests. I also comb through reams of testing data to ensure that the methods we employ produce valid results. This is an oversimplification of my job, and it's only relevant as a reassurance that I'm acquainted with some specifics on how the scientific method is leveraged for the prosperity of mankind. I won't list off my academic achievements or qualifications. I want what I have to say to stand on its own merits. Now, the man who wrote the work which we'll be reviewing, my father, he also gives no qualifications because although many people rely on such things when deciding to whom they should listen, educated people are entirely capable of having no idea what they're talking about. I'm going to break the ice, though, by giving you an inkling of the mind behind this piece. My father's PhD is in mathematics, but his level of expertise is such that there are probably a handful of people on Earth with whom he could communicate fully and freely about the furthest fringes of the most advanced mathematics. In fact, his expertise is such that when rocket scientists got stumped by complexities beyond their mathematical abilities, they would contact my father, and he would spend several weeks or months helping them through what they thought were insurmountably complex problems. My father is one of those people who can take any problem in life and work to a solution much faster than most people. Now, I used to work shoulder to shoulder with surgeons. I had a lot of good, intelligent conversations with some very sharp and intelligent people, so I want you to grasp my full meaning when I say that my father is the most educated and intelligent person I've ever met. His scientific work among physicists is where he got a lot of his applied understanding of science. For those of you who don't know, that is not the sort of scientific work you're employed to do unless you know exactly what you're doing and capable of learning very quickly. Now, as for what inspired my father to write this brief treatise on science versus atheism, first, I'm going to out my father as a theist. Now, I am too, though there was a brief period when I didn't identify as such. I felt more agnostic, kind of leaning toward atheism. And it was actually my father's writing which brought me back around. Now, growing up in my parents' household, education was very heavily encouraged and emphasized in our upbringing. Now, my father was subscribed to a number of different educational magazines, and these were always available for reading, always sitting on the dining room table where my siblings and I couldn't avoid them as we ate breakfast. And there was National Geographic, Scientific American, Reader's Digest, Time Magazine, etc. Well, one day back in 2002, while reading one of these publications, he happened upon an article entitled 15 Answers to Creationist Nonsense. Now, this article didn't offend my father as a theist, it offended him as a scientist. And my father read the piece and was mortified at the author's lack of understanding about even the most basic fundamentals of how science works. In a nutshell, he found it riddled with fallacies, but to the layman, it sounded legitimate. Now, he was incensed enough to write a response to the author, who was editor-in-chief at the time, and he found that in order to cut through the ignorance of the author, he had to lay a lot of basic scientific groundwork and offer some extended explanations. And because of that, his response letter sort of grew and grew until it was about 35 pages long. He sent it in, and, as expected, he received no reply. But he had on his hands a work of scientific explanation that both defies and dismantles a lot of what you might read in the works of today's atheists. If you keep listening, whether theist or atheist, this will shake up your understanding of science. Now, as I mentioned previously, my father took some time to lay a foundation of understanding before addressing the contents of the article in question. So after a brief introduction, he's going to say a few things about a number of topics pertinent to the subject. I warn you that his syntax can be a little dense to get through. His initial explanations might sound a bit textbookish. I'll try to interject where I think further explanation might be helpful, but when he gets to his analysis of the atheist article, he'll sound a lot more conversational and his words will be easier to parse. So just bear with me. The explanations are important, so listen through them, and hopefully his analysis brings their application into focus. As a quick clarification, by the way, this is a scientific discourse, not a religious sermon, though he does on occasion briefly touch on the significance of theism. And without further delay, let's get into it. This discourse is simply entitled A Response.